Shalom and welcome to a very special edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Emet, and joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Sheikh the Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanofsky, Anshe Chesed in New York City. We are recording this on day 731 of the captivity of the hostages. We are Erev Sukkot, also praying that these days be momentous in terms of the fate of the hostages. Will we see a deal? Will we see them released over the next few days over the course of Sukkot? We certainly pray that that be the case. It is exactly 2 years since October the 7th. That on the secular calendar coincides with the first day of Sukkot, which makes the observance of Sukkot somewhat complicated, a day of joy, a day of rejoicing, yet also layered with this terrible moment in modern Jewish history. There's no way around it. But we want to talk about Sukkot and devote some thinking today about the special reading for Sukkot, the Book of Kohelet, the Book of Ecclesiastes. Um, I just want to ask just some basic questions before we get into it. Where does the custom come from? What do we know of the reading of Kohelet during Sukkot? Maybe you could shed some light on that for us, Rabbi Kalmanovsky, having just
I wish that I could a little bit more than I do. It's certainly attested. It's certainly attested in the Middle Ages. Um, the Abu Draham was a 12th century Spanish commentator, quotes it, maybe 13th century. Rashi also discusses it, but I don't think that it is actually attested in classical rabbinic literature, Talmud and Midrash. Although I could be wrong about that, but I think that it's a pretty well entrenched custom, but I don't think it is a norm in the way that reading Megillat Esther is. I've never seen it read out of a scroll, but I wonder, like when you read Megillat Esther, you Asher Kichanu B'tzvotav V'tzivanu Al Mikra Megillah, you have a commandment that you must read it. If I was reading Kohelet off of a scroll, would I say Al Mikra Megillah? I
I
don't
think
know.
the Vilna Gaon has a
I
position.
think he says that you do. And
Yes.
I think if I remember correctly, he prefers to read from a scroll rather than from a book.
Well, wouldn't you?
Well, it puts a great burden on the reader. It's the longest
Sure.
Megillah,
As long as Megillah.
and then you have to supply all the emendations and trope. But
Yes.
it's worth speculating about why we recite Megillot at all. And it could be that it's just a way for people to become more familiar with Ketuvim. And so that once a year, we'll read the five Megillot, just like we read the five books of Moses, the Torah. And, it may have some pedagogical function in that sense.
In that sense. So let me ask you this question because it's occurred to me that the three holidays, the three major holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, have different kinds of things associated with them. Uh, Pesach is more or less organized around a text, a narrative. Shavuot, as it is emerged for us, is organized around Torah, but Shavuot in antiquity was organized around a declaration, and Sukkot, it seems, has no text. Um, is this a way of trying to put a text into Sukkot, or is there something else going on here?
By the way, just as long as we're
Yeah.
here, Masechet Sofrim does say Masechet Sofrim is a post-Talmudic tractate around synagogue practices and stuff like that, and it does say, chapter 14, paragraph 1, Berut b'shir hashrim b'kohelet ba'echod Megillat Esther tzarich lebarech.
Okay.
Al Mikra Megillah. If you read any of the five Megillot, including Kohelet, um, you should recite that kind of ritual
Right,
blessing.
but that seems to imply that you must have a scroll.
Right? It does. I agree with that. It does seem to imply that.
So what we're saying then is the custom of reading Megillat Eicha probably goes back to before medieval Judaism,
Well,
probably
Golenic period.
the Gaonic period. Okay,
Yeah.
so all right, let's go back to my question, which is each one of the holidays has a certain kind of literature associated with it. Sukkot arguably does not. Discuss.
So let's say like this. Um, we know that there was a general sort of pattern that that our holidays probably were, back in the midst of time, agricultural festivals which acquire moral, historical, spiritual narratives which make them make sense. And you have harvest festivals in the early spring, and they develop into historical festivals about leaving Egypt and receiving the Torah. Hanukkah looks, as much as we can tell, like a winter solstice festival that becomes associated with historical events. Purim, every culture has a kind of late winter, early spring
Mardi
revelry,
Gras.
Mardi Gras. And Sukkot is deeply agricultural. It's about the fall harvest, and of the seven species in the land of Israel, we have wheat and barley, which are Pesach and Shavuot. Flip that. Barley and wheat are Pesach and Shavuot. And then the other festivals, Eretz Zeit Shemen Udvash Geffen V'Teina V'Rimon, the figs, the pomegranates, the wine, the grapes, the zeit shemen, udvash, the dates, and the olive oil, they tend to ripen into late summer, into the fall. So it's really important economically for ancient Israelites to have this, harvest festival. It's the shift. It just really almost never rains in Israel in the summer, and the rainy season begins now. So it's really important. And our even our rituals now, the lulav and etrog are associated with, a kind of a prayer for rain. And so it's really light on the meaning beyond the agricultural. It's pretty light. Our rituals are, I mean, if I can say with a little bit of maybe a little bit of irreverence, they've got a little fertility rain dance there. It feels pretty primitive. You need those grapes, you need those olives, and you totally feel what the ancient farmers must have felt about going into the fields and celebrating their harvest. But that doesn't mean anything other than thank heavens we've got food. We pray for rain. Kohelet, being a book about wisdom, we can decide which parts are particularly wise or which parts are, maybe a little bit cynical. Uh, Wants to put all of that into perspective and help the worshipers, help the Israelites, help the Jews make sense out of what it is. Like how should they hold in proportion their joy at
So
material wealth?
you make a fascinating point because there's something odd about the Shalosh Regalim, the three pilgrimage festivals, because there is in the Bible and into the rabbinic period a historicizing process where the agricultural holiday is provided a historical background. And the earliest one, of course, is Pesach with Yetziat Mitzrayim, with the Exodus from Egypt. Um, and then in the Bible, Sukkot in the Torah, Sukkot is given a historical overview. In Vayikra, where we dwell in the booths like we did in the wilderness, and Shavuot is the outlier until the rabbis attach revelation. And the three periods of time that we mark are all outside the land of Israel. And it's as if to suggest that our ancestors took these agricultural holidays and removed the focus of the land to give them a historical foundation. But Sukkot remains the outlier because our rituals are so clearly agricultural. They're not historical, right? We don't read about our ancestors waving a lulav and etrog in the wilderness, or even dwelling in Sukkot in the wilderness. Um, so it's food for thought.
Let me pose this one to you, which is that each of the three Chagim have these dominant modalities, or whatever metaphor you want to use. They're in a musical key, or they're in a they have a medium to it. So Pesach is about narrative. That is, we talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim, or we talked about the Korban Pesach. uh, Shavuot, the dominant key was declaration at the of your first fruits. That the pilgrim was to recite a declaration upon bringing the first fruits at the temple. Arami Oved Avi, that the whole passage in Kitavo. My father was a wandering Aramean, and here I've brought you these fruits. Sukkot does not have a narrative. It does not have a declaration, but Sukkot, at least from the second temple time, maybe even first temple time, Sukkot is a very temple-based holiday. Certainly after Solomon, we got to remember, King Solomon dedicates the temple, eighth chapter of First Kings at Sukkot, um, and that's liturgy. That's lots of singing. That's your body. So I guess, I want to say that Passover is your head in terms of, story. I guess Shavuot is uh, declaration, whatever that would be, and Sukkot is your whole body. You're
Well, and Sukkot, the main rituals are movement, right?
move.
At Pesach, we sit at a table. There's not a lot of movement, except when you get up to wash. Um, but Sukkot today for us is all about movement, right? The lulav and the etrog, we march around the shul with them. We wave them during Hallel. And even the Sukkah we have to move outside of our house,
You have to
even
be
if it's
there with your
just
whole body.
for Kiddush or a meal.
Yes, you'll be with your whole body.
You want to know something uh, off topic, but I for years wanted this book called Kiddush Hashem. It was written in the Warsaw Ghetto. It was part of the Oneg Shabbos archives, the first person testimony written by Rav Shimon Huberband, and very detailed stuff about the ghetto. And he's a Talmid Chacham, reflections about the theme of Kiddush Hashem through history. And I found it just recently, and in it there's a bit on humor in the ghetto, and he includes the following joke. He says the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto are so pious, so pious. They eat as if every day is Yom Kippur, and they sleep as if every day is Sukkot,
Yeah.
and they dress as if every day is Purim. So they got nothing to eat, they got nothing to wear, and no house to sleep in. And he turns it into a joke. I thought that was pretty funny.
Wow. Okay.
Very sure. Well, that's, I guess, what we would call an example of wisdom.
That's a good segue because Kohelet is about wisdom. So, what is it about the year, or what is it about us at this point that says we have an appetite for this, or that we need this, or that the tradition says, spend a day or spend one of the days, the Shabbat Chol Hamoed or wherever it falls, and open this book, crack it open. What is the place of wisdom in this holiday? Why are we looking for wisdom here?
Well, at least part of wisdom, I think, is I alluded to this before, is some sense of proportion about your relationship to material well-being. Um, I, I think that in some ways it's very, very hard for us to understand the level of vulnerability. I mean, we all talk about, Sukkot is a way we experience vulnerability. We go out from our permanent homes into temporary shelters, and that's, that's kind of the motif of the holiday. But it is hard for us because our permanent homes are so permanent, much, much more stable than ancient people's homes. And it's really very, it's a performance art. And we, even not denying that there's great disparities of wealth and poverty and inequality in our lives. Of course, it's true. but the poorest people have access to water and clothing and all kinds of stuff in American life. The poorest people in America live better than the richest people in the Middle Ages. And and so for us it's kind of performative. Um, we also need proportion. But when Kohelet says, listen, nobody was richer than me, and I understand how unfulfilling the pursuit of money is. Ha'ohev kesef lo yisbak kesef. If you love money, you'll never be satisfied with money. And so at a time of material abundance at Sukkot, you're feeling great, you're feasting perhaps in a way that you don't fast in the rest of the year. Part of the wisdom is don't don't get too in love with all of this material stuff because it doesn't matter on a deeper scale.
Look, yeah, I could argue that we need that all the time. And I think arguably, many of us walk around with certain statements and things that have been taught to us and quotes that we remember all the time. People, share them, and there is a bit of currency in terms of, I heard this, or this was spoken, or that, and I would say in rabbinic life, this is something that comes up, all too often, especially when called on to speak to people who are celebrating whatever point it is in the life cycle, and especially at death, where we are often reflecting on people. I'm certainly asking this question when I am preparing remarks, eulogies, and thinking, what did I learn? What have I learned from this person? What does this life teach me?
So
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to share. Michael Fox wrote the JPS commentary on Ecclesiastes, and he makes this statement that the boldest, most radical notion in the book is not Kohelet's contradictions, his pessimism, or his observations of injustices. It is the belief that the individual can and should proceed toward truth by means of his own powers of perception and reasoning, and that he can in this way discover truths previously unknown. There are no eternal rules, no doctrines or traditions to which his conclusions must conform. And I think that in this light, wisdom is something that we pursue because it roots our lives in ourselves. And it reminds us that in a certain sense, we're the master of our own destiny. And, the book also reminds us that our destiny is not always what we want or what we think it should be.
This
And
is
that's a good message for Sukkot. But I just one last point before you jump in, Jeremy. It's also worth thinking about the difference of reading Kohelet on Shabbat Chol HaMoed in the midst of Sukkot and on Shmini Atzeret. I think they have two different valences.
um, that's definitely true, and in Israel, it's often or in different, I guess, different places. They sometimes will read it on Shmini Atzeret. There's no single minhag about when it gets read, and of course, Kohelet's most famous lines, about time for this and a time for that, and Eit Milchama ve'Eit Shalom, reading it in and around the time of October 7th for the rest of certainly our lives on this earth, and then for generations perhaps to come, it'll be overshadowed by those terrible events. Um, Eit laharog ve'Eit lirpo, time for killing and time for healing. Uh, but I was just going to say, Kohelet, uh, uh, there's a kind of a secular quality that accords with what you were saying, Barry, about we have to use our own minds, we have to use our own experiences. Becomes the source of wisdom. Kohelet does end on a very pious note. Sof davar hakol nishma et Elohim yoreh et mitzvotav yishmor. In the end of the day, just do what God says. That's almost certainly a appendage. It doesn't accord with the rest of the book, and in fact, um, God, to the extent that God appears in Kohelet, it's a little bit of an arbitrary and frustrating thing because sometimes God, you know, uh, deprives good people of their deserved material abundance and gives it to their rotten children, and so God's pretty inscrutable in this book, And so it accords with what you were saying that um, so in a sense, God has given us a very, very difficult task. There's a pasuk in there. What is it? Finding it now. That I'm not finding it right now, but uh, God, there's I think an Inyan Ra that God gave people to La Notbo. There's a difficult task that God gave us to occupy ourselves, to try to find stuff out, but we can't find stuff out. And so sometimes Kohelet seems to say, listen, have a sense of proportion. You will not understand. Enjoy what you have because arbitrarily it may be snapped away from you. And sometimes he seems to say, keep it in proportion. It's not really of significance if you have more money or less because it's just unreliable. It's just very, very, erratic whether or not you are going to enjoy this life. And if you do, enjoy it while you got it, because tomorrow it's out of here.
I I'm keep going back to, the idea that we do pursue wisdom, and there is a need for conversation, that conversations that are triggered by the statements of Kohelet. Uh, One of the themes that I've been thinking about, since the beginning of the year, and I spoke about it on Yom Kippur, is the need for conversation, and that, in fact, Parsha Talk provides a certain kind of model. Certainly, the three of us, been getting together. This is like we're over 5 years on YouTube now, um, and we have so many dozens and hundreds of listeners and viewers, hoping that a conversation is happening and that they're sharing this conversation. But it occurs to me that, given that the conversation at Passover is scripted, and that the way that Shavuot has evolved is that it's an open conversation based on Torah throughout the night, um, and that Shavuot has become this kind of omnibus of all the offerings that are available. Sukkot doesn't have any of that, and that um, Kohelet functions as triggers or as conversation starters. Um, and we may be inclined when we're sitting in a sukkah to not talk about deep matters. In fact, who would want to? You're with people that you love, you're with your community, and it's more like the weather and what's going on in your life. It's you're being a community in the sukkah. You're sharing each other's lives in the sukkah. And maybe what Kohelet is saying is, go a little deeper, have a conversation, because the conversation itself can give you life, and that's not a bad thing. We are experiencing the change of the season. We are. I could speak for myself. I'm a little more wistful at this time. I love this season because the season of the colors and the leaves, and you know that because this season is changing, uh, that you are now on a different trajectory in your life, and these uh, moments compel you to think about things much more deeply, I guess.
I was just up in, as I mentioned to you guys before we were recording, and I texted you this yesterday. I was up in Orange County, New York yesterday to perform a wedding, and I have to say, oh my God, the foliage was just, and this is the beginning of October. The foliage was just fabulous. And, my daughter getting married at the end of October in what we hope will be a great
Peak
outdoor day.
moment.
And it'll be peak foliage. And now I don't mean to bring a Kohelet note into these things,
But please do.
there's those were two young people. Everyone was celebrating them, and that will be again at the end of the month. And as the previous generation, I see those leaves fall, and you recognize some of your own mortality, and all rivers run to the sea, and the sea is never filled. By the way, that's one of the great things about the rhetoric of Kohelet. Oh my God, this guy is just such an amazing writer. Part of what the book, perhaps does for us is even though it can often be quite dark and snarky and cynical, you
I
know,
love that.
you love that part. It's amazingly good writing. So listen to this pasuk. This happens to be chapter 5, verse 14. And this is Kohelet, perhaps at one of his most grim, right? Ka'asher yatsa mi beten imo arum yashuv laleket ksheba ume'uma lo yisa be'amalo sheyolech biyado. Another grave evil is this, that you depart just as you came, as he came naked out of his mother's womb, so he must depart at last, naked as he came. He takes nothing of his wealth to carry with him. Gam ze ra'ah chola kol umat sheba ken yelech uma yitron lo sheya'amol ruach. So what good is it for his toiling after the wind?
Yeah, just hit me harder.
You
Maybe
want it darker.
maybe that's the
That's right.
point.
You want it darker. This is a
You,
Leonard Cohen kind of this is a Leonard Cohen
absolutely.
kind of book.
Yeah, I once wrote a skit for my show about um, that the board of the library was selecting a book to read for the whole community, and they had a bunch of nominees, and one person, the most depressive person, said, "We should really read Ecclesiastes. It's a great book. That should be the book that the whole community reads." Why? Because it has vanity of vanities.
No, and it also has Tovim Hashnayim Min HaEchad. It also has, two are better than one. Let me find that pasuk here.
Mishulash.
Um, uh, Two are better than one in that they have greater benefit from their earnings. Ki'im yiplu ha'echad yakim et chavero, ve'ilo ha'echad she'ipol ein sheni lahakimo. Should one fall, if you have a companion, he can raise you up. But woe is to one who is all alone and falls with no companion to raise him. כי אם ישכבו שניים וחם להם, ולאחד איך יחם. Two lie together, they keep each other warm. How can one all alone stay warm? And it continues on a little bit. והחוט המשולש לא במהרה
That's it.
ייפסק. The threefold cord cannot easily be snapped. Like those are comments about human togetherness. Like the world's cold, the world's scary, it often stinks. And together we can bear it better. And that's just beautiful.
So the Hoop Mishulash, what I think speaks to me is that it's the weaving together of our lives with other people that give us the meaning in the dark times when circumstances seem to deprive us of that which we think we're rightfully entitled to.
All right, we're winding down. Just could you share maybe that would be your verse, the verse to share, or some other passage that you want to leave our viewers and listeners with? Anything?
Yeah. Near the end of the book, the making of many books is without limit, and much study is a wearing of the flesh. So when you were talking about conversation, when we read the Megillah out loud in the synagogue, that's the kind of conversation. And I think that we sometimes forget that our ancestors were much more oral than we are. We
Yeah.
tend to read more. And reading is a solitary act. You can't really read with someone else, right? What goes on in your head is not really shared with anyone else when you read. But conversation allows you to find out what is going on in someone else's head. And I think that that's something that we want to hold on to, especially this year on Sukkot.
Rabbi Kamenovsky.
I'm looking for the flies here. Where do we go here?
Here, let me do it before you. Okay, so
Okay, okay.
I'm not going to speak to a Kohelet verse, but I'm going to speak to a midrash on Kohelet that I've been thinking about, which is that th there's a long little midrashic essay that says the heart does this, the heart speaks, the heart sees, the heart feels, the heart, and it's a long, beautiful midrash with different kinds of quotations that prove everything about the heart, the heart being metaphor. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot over the last few weeks. Considering bechol levavcha, all your heart, etc. And that's a midrash that I would point to, that the heart for everything is a heart for everything. Jeremy, now your verse.
There's so many great ones, like it's better to be a living dog than a dead lion, and dead flies make the perfume stink, and I appreciate Kohelet's snarkiness, but I think like I said, sometimes it's this world is totally unfair, it stinks, and sometimes this world is totally unfair, so enjoy what you got. But I also appreciate that there's a kind of cyclical quality, that whole chapter three, a time for this and time for that, and his awareness that there is, among all this fluctuation, all the unfortunateness of you worked so hard and you get nothing from it, and that guy over there didn't work at all and struck it rich. Um, in that first chapter, the cyclical nature of the weather is so amazing. Dor holech v'dor ba v'haaretz le'olam omadet. One generation, the generations come and go, the earth remains forever. Zarach hashemesh u'ba hashemesh. The sun rises and sets. Ve'el mekomos sho'ef. And somehow hurries back to the east. Zoreach husham, so it can rise again. Holech el darom, and the poetry of this is just amazing. Holech el darom v'sovev el tzafon. Sovev, sovev, holech haruach, v'al svivotav shav haruach. The wind blows south, it turns again north, it's ever turning around and around, the wind blows. Kol hanechalim holchim el hayam,
Yeah.
v'hayam einenu maleh. All the rivers flow into the ocean, and the ocean is never filled. El makom shenachalim holchim, sham hem shavim lalachat. And to the place where they flow, then they flow right back there again. And then Kohelet says about that, okay, so this all stinks. But no, it doesn't all stink. It's actually the totality of nature, of existence, is a pattern, and it all stinks if you think this is all created so that you can make money. That's not going to happen. But to have a kind of attitude towards the cyclical nature, the just self-contained and enduring nature of rivers and seas and suns and the earth lasting forever, I find that very beautiful.
Indeed. Well, there is a time for everything under the sun. There's a time to start Parsha Talk and a time to bring it to its conclusion. What better way to bring it to conclusion than to, first of all, thank all of our viewers and listeners. I checked the Ramah website. We had about 750 views or clicks on SoundCloud last week. That I announced to the shul that I think we're up to like 1,000 between Barry, your Facebook page, the Anshe Chesed Facebook, my YouTube channel, and Camp Ramah, which we are so grateful to for hosting us so many years. We are really in expanding our reach here. We thank everybody for tuning in, listening, giving us your time, as you may be preparing for Yontiv, having your own conversations. So have conversations. Marbeh Torah, Marbeh Chaim, Marbeh Sicha, Marbeh Chaim. More conversation, more life.
Well, you know what goes along with that? It's something else not nice in Pirkei Avot there.
Yes, yes, yes. So
Yeah.
what we want to say then is to everyone, a beautiful Sukkot, Hag Sameah. We pray that the hostages will come home and that it'll be a time not only for celebration, but a time for truly embarking on the time of healing. Eit Rifo, a time for healing for Klal Yisrael, for Am Yisrael. Everyone,
Amen.
Hag
Amen.
Sameah. We'll see you next
Hag
time.
Sameah.
Okay.
Parsha. Bye-bye.